The private investigator slid the photographs across my kitchen table, and my $3 million dream turned into a nightmare in the span of 3 heartbeats. My daughter Jessica's husband wasn't dying from cancer at all. He was perfectly healthy, laughing at a golf course with his buddies while I'd been losing sleep over his supposed emergency surgery. I picked up my phone and canceled the $400,000 bank transfer with fingers that barely trembled. Drop your city in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Let's dive into the story. Let me back up and tell you how I got here, because honey, this story starts with the kind of luck most people only dream about. 3 weeks ago, I was Margaret Collins, a 67-year-old retired librarian from Minneapolis, clipping coupons and calculating whether I could afford the good toilet paper. Then my lottery numbers came up, and suddenly I was Margaret Collins, millionaire. I'd been playing the same numbers for 15 years, my late husband's birthday, the day we got married, and the date we bought our little house on Elm Street. Tom had always said those numbers would come through someday. He just didn't live long enough to see it happen. The night I won, I sat in my empty living room, staring at the ticket until the numbers blurred. $3 million. After taxes, about $2 million. Enough to never worry about money again. Enough to help my family. Enough to finally live a little before I got too old to enjoy it. I called Jessica first, naturally. She was my only child, and despite our complicated relationship, she was all the family I had left. When I told her about the lottery win, she screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Mom, oh my God, this is incredible! You deserve this so much!" Her voice was bright with excitement, genuine happiness for me. For a moment, it felt like we were close again, like when she was little and would run to me with scraped knees and broken hearts. "I keep thinking your father would have loved this," I said, wiping away tears I hadn't expected. He always believed in those numbers. "Dad was right," Jessica said softly. "He was always right about the important things. Mom, this is going to change everything for you. You can travel. You can get that kitchen renovation you've wanted. You can finally spoil yourself." I smiled at the warmth in her voice. Maybe this windfall would bring us closer together. Maybe we could finally bridge the gap that had grown between us since Tom's death 5 years ago. "I was thinking I might help you and Brad with the mortgage," I said carefully. "Maybe pay it off completely." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Jessica's voice came back, different now, careful. "Mom, that's incredibly generous, but we're managing fine. Brad's practice is doing well, and we don't want you to feel obligated to fix our problems." Her husband Brad was a dentist with a successful practice in suburban Chicago. They lived in a beautiful colonial house with a 3-car garage and a swimming pool. Jessica worked part-time as a real estate agent, more for something to do than from financial necessity. I'd always admired their independence. "It wouldn't be an obligation," I said. "It would be my pleasure. What's the point of having this money if I can't share it with the people I love?" "Can we talk about it later?" Jessica asked. "I need to process all this. It's just so amazing, Mom. I'm so happy for you." We hung up, and I spent the rest of the evening making lists of all the things I could do with my new fortune. Travel to Ireland like Tom and I had always planned. Donate to the library where I'd worked for 30 years. Set up college funds for any future grandchildren Jessica might give me. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of meetings with financial advisors, tax attorneys, and investment counselors. Everyone wanted to help me manage my money, and everyone had opinions about what I should do with it. I kept thinking about Jessica's reaction, how she'd seemed almost uncomfortable with my offer to help with their mortgage. But then, 3 days ago, everything changed. Jessica called me at 7 in the morning, her voice tight with panic. "Mom, I need to ask you for something, and I know the timing is terrible, but we're desperate." My heart clenched. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "It's Brad. He's been having some health issues, and we finally got the test results yesterday." Her voice broke. "Mom, it's cancer, aggressive. The doctors say he needs surgery immediately, but our insurance is fighting it. They're calling it experimental treatment." The bottom fell out of my world. Brad was only 45, healthy as a horse the last time I'd seen him. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. What kind of cancer?" "Liver cancer. It's rare, but there's a specialist in Houston who's had success with this particular type. The surgery costs $400,000, and we need to pay up front." "Mom, I know you just won the lottery. And I swore I wouldn't ask you for money, but of course, I said immediately. Of course I'll help. Brad is family. Family comes first. The relief in her voice was overwhelming. Thank you, Mom. Thank you so much. I know it's a lot of money, but we'll pay you back every penny, I promise. Don't worry about paying me back. Just focus on getting Brad well. But something nagged at me as we made arrangements for the wire transfer. Maybe it was my librarian instincts, trained to verify information and check sources. Maybe it was the fact that Jessica had gone from not wanting my help to needing almost $500,000 in the span of 3 weeks. Or maybe it was just the suspicious nature that comes from living alone for too long. That afternoon, I hired a private investigator. Now, sitting at my kitchen table with photographs of my supposedly dying son-in-law playing golf and laughing with friends, I understood exactly what kind of fool I'd almost been. The kind who gets taken for $400,000 by her own daughter. I picked up my phone and dialed Jessica's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice anxious. Mom, did the transfer go through? The hospital needs confirmation by 5 o'clock. Jessica, I said calmly, we need to talk. What do you mean we need to talk? Jessica's voice had that edge it got whenever she thought she was about to be criticized. Mom, this isn't the time for one of your lectures. Brad is literally waiting for surgery approval. I spread the photographs across my table like a deck of cards, each one showing a different angle of Brad's perfectly healthy golf game. I'm sure he is, sweetheart. Tell me, which hospital in Houston are you using? I'd like to send flowers. The pause was so brief that someone who didn't know Jessica might have missed it. But I'd raised this girl, and I knew every tell she had. Methodist Hospital. Mom, I really don't have time to chat right now. The wire transfer... Strange thing about Methodist Hospital, I interrupted, enjoying the way my calm tone seemed to rattle her. I called them this morning. Funny thing, they've never heard of Brad Henderson. Dead silence. Mom, what are you talking about? Of course they've heard of him. He's been a patient there for weeks. Have you been lying to me for weeks then? I asked conversationally. Because according to Methodist's patient records department, no one named Brad Henderson has been admitted, scheduled for admission, or even had an outpatient appointment in the past 6 months. You called the hospital? Jessica's voice rose to a pitch that probably scared the neighbors. You actually called and checked up on me? What kind of mother does that? The kind who raised a daughter smart enough to come up with an elaborate con story, but too careless to pick a real hospital, I said dryly. Oh, and Jessica? Next time you decide to fake your husband's cancer, you might want to make sure he's not posting Instagram photos of himself at the country club. The sound Jessica made was part gasp, part sob, and entirely guilt. Mom, you don't understand. Oh, but I do understand, honey. I understand perfectly. You saw that I won the lottery. You waited exactly long enough for the money to clear, and then you invented a medical emergency serious enough to justify asking for almost half of my winnings. That's not. We really do need the money. For what? A new BMW? A kitchen renovation? A European vacation? I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded, how detached I felt. It was like watching someone else's daughter destroy someone else's family. What exactly do you need $400,000 for, Jessica? We have debts, she exploded. Real debts. Brad's practice isn't doing as well as we thought, and we took out loans for the house renovation, and the kids' private school tuition is killing us, and... So you decided to solve your financial problems by lying to your mother about your husband having cancer. We were desperate. And you have all this money now, money you don't even need. You live in the same house you've lived in for 30 years. You drive a car that's older than my children. You shop at thrift stores for fun. What are you going to do with $3 million, Mom? Sit on it until you die? The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. In Jessica's mind, I was just an old woman with too much money and not enough sense to know what to do with it. A convenient ATM with gray hair and a soft heart. You know what hurts the most? I said quietly. It's not even the money. It's that you thought so little of me that you believed I'd never find out. You thought I was just some senile old lady who'd hand over $400,000 without asking a single question. Mom, please, I know how it looks, but we really are in trouble. Stop. My voice cut through her desperate backpedaling. Just stop talking, Jessica. Every word you say makes this worse. What are you going to do? Her voice was small now, scared. Good. I looked at the photographs again, at Brad's grinning face as he lined up a putt, at my daughter's husband, healthy as a horse and probably laughing about the story they'd concocted to fleece his mother-in-law. I'm going to do something I should have done years ago. What does that mean? It means you're about to learn what happens when you try to con someone who has nothing left to lose. I hung up before she could respond. For the first time in 5 years, since Tom died and left me rattling around in this house like a marble in a coffee can, I felt truly alive. Angry, yes. Hurt, absolutely. But alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. I opened my laptop and started researching. If Jessica wanted to play games with someone else's money, she was about to discover that her mild-mannered librarian mother had learned a few things about research and planning over the years. The phone rang. Jessica again. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her tearful message about how sorry she was, how they really did need help, how she'd made a terrible mistake, but surely we could work something out. I deleted the message and kept researching. By dinner time, I had a plan that would have made Tom proud. He'd always said I was too nice for my own good, too willing to let people take advantage of my generous nature. Margaret, he used to say, someday someone's going to mistake your kindness for weakness. And when that happens, you show them exactly how wrong they are. Jessica had just made that mistake, and I was about to show her exactly how wrong she was about her harmless old mother. The doorbell rang at 8 o'clock. Through the peephole, I could see Jessica's face, red-eyed and desperate. She'd driven all the way from Chicago, a 6-hour trip, which meant she was truly panicked. I opened the door with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Well, look what the cat dragged in. Jessica looked like she'd been crying for hours, which she probably had. Her perfectly styled hair was a mess. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, and her makeup had smeared into dark circles under her eyes. She looked exactly like what she was, a desperate woman who'd been caught in a lie and was now facing the consequences. Mom, please, can I come in? We need to talk about this. Oh, now you want to talk? I stepped aside to let her in, but my tone remained ice cold. That's funny, because 3 hours ago when I tried to have an honest conversation with you, you were too busy spinning lies about your husband's fictional cancer. Jessica collapsed onto my living room sofa like a puppet with cut strings. I know how it looks, but you have to understand the pressure we're under. The debt, the mortgage, the kids' schools, it's crushing us. So crushing that you thought faking cancer was your only option? I settled into Tom's old recliner, the one I'd kept exactly as he'd left it. Tell me, Jessica, whose idea was it? Yours or Brad's? Her face flushed red. It wasn't like that. We weren't trying to hurt you. Whose idea was it? It was both of us, okay? We were desperate. And when you won the lottery, it seemed like maybe God was giving us a way out of this mess. By lying to me about Brad dying. My voice was flat, emotionless. I'd perfected this tone during my years as a librarian when dealing with teenagers who thought they could fool me about missing books or late fees. Using cancer as your cover story. Do you have any idea how many people I've watched die from cancer, Jessica? Your father's brother? My best friend Eleanor? My co-worker Janet, who fought for 2 years before it finally took her. Jessica's face went even redder. I know it was wrong. Wrong? I laughed, and the sound was bitter enough to make Jessica flinch. Wrong is forgetting to call on my birthday. Wrong is being late to family dinner. This isn't wrong, Jessica. This is evil. Don't say that. She jumped up from the couch, pacing to the window and back. I'm not evil. I'm just desperate. Do you know what it's like to have everything you've worked for slipping away? To watch your kids get used to a lifestyle you can't maintain anymore? No, I don't know what that's like, I said calmly, because your father and I lived within our means. We didn't buy houses we couldn't afford or put our children in schools that required us to lie, cheat, and steal to pay for. You don't understand the pressure. The pressure of what? Of maintaining appearances? Of keeping up with your country club friends? I stood up, and something in my posture made Jessica take a step backward. Let me tell you about pressure, sweetheart. Pressure is working 2 jobs while your husband goes through chemo. Pressure is choosing between buying groceries and buying medicine. Pressure is being offered $3 million and knowing it won't bring back the man you loved. Jessica's face crumpled, And for a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who'd climb into my lap when she was scared or hurt. But that little girl was gone, replaced by a woman who thought lying about cancer was an acceptable way to solve her financial problems. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know there's no excuse for what we did, but please don't let this destroy our relationship. You're all the family I have left. I'm all the family you have left? The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. Funny thing about family, Jessica. It's supposed to be based on love and trust, not lies and theft. It wasn't theft. I was going to pay you back. With what money? The money you don't have because you're drowning in debt? I shook my head. You had no intention of paying me back, and we both know it. Jessica sat down again, her shoulders slumping in defeat. What do you want me to say? That we're terrible people? That we deserve whatever you're planning to do to us? Fine, I'll say it. But please, Mom, don't destroy my family over this. Destroy your family? I tilted my head, studying her. Sweetheart, I'm not going to destroy your family. You've already done that yourself. What do you mean? I walked to the kitchen and came back with a thick folder I'd prepared after my phone calls that afternoon. This is what I mean. I handed her the folder and watched her face change as she opened it. Inside were printouts of her mortgage statements, credit card bills, loan documents, all the financial information that had become public record when she defaulted on various payments over the past year. How did you get these? I'm a librarian, honey. Research is what I do. I sat back down, enjoying the shocked expression on her face. Did you know your mortgage payment is 3 months behind? Or that Brad's practice is facing a malpractice lawsuit that could bankrupt you both? Or that you've already borrowed against the kids' college funds? Jessica stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. You had no right. I had every right to research the people who were trying to steal my money, I interrupted. And what I found is that you're not just desperate, Jessica. You're drowning. That house of yours, the one with the 3-car garage and the swimming pool, you can't afford it, and you haven't been able to afford it for years. We've had some setbacks. Some setbacks? I pulled out one particular document, a bank notice that made Jessica go pale. Your checking account has been overdrawn for 6 weeks. You're living on credit cards that are maxed out. Brad's practice is hemorrhaging money because of the lawsuit, and you've been lying to everyone, including yourselves, about how bad things really are. Jessica was quiet for a long moment, staring at the papers. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. What are you going to do? That depends, I said, settling back in Tom's chair. Are you ready to tell me the truth? All of it? Or are you going to keep lying to me like you've been lying to everyone else? She looked down at her hands, then back at me. What do you want to know? Everything, starting with how much you really owe and ending with why you thought lying about Brad's cancer was your only option. Jessica took a shaky breath. We owe about $800,000 total. The mortgage, the second mortgage, credit cards, Brad's practice loans. The kids' school tuition we put on credit cards when the practice started struggling. $800,000. I let that sink in. And you thought $400,000 would solve your problems? It would have bought us time. We could have paid down some of the high-interest debt, maybe sold the house and found something smaller. Or, I said slowly, you could have done that without stealing from me. We tried. But Brad's too proud to declare bankruptcy, and I couldn't stand the thought of disappointing the kids by taking them out of their school and away from their friends. And there it was, the truth at last. They'd decided my money was their solution because they were too proud and too image-conscious to face reality. Well, Jessica, I said, standing up, since you've finally decided to be honest with me, I'm going to be honest with you. Her face went white. What do you mean? I mean, you're right about one thing. Your family is about to be destroyed, but not by me. I walked to the front door and opened it. I think it's time for you to leave. Jessica didn't move from the couch. Mom, you can't just throw me out. We need to figure this out. We? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. There is no we in this situation, sweetheart. There's me with my lottery winnings, and there's you with your lies and your debts and your complete lack of moral compass. I'm still your daughter. Are you? I kept my hand on the open door, feeling the cool October air rush into the house. Because the daughter I raised would never have done what you did. The daughter I raised would have called me and said, "Mom, we're in financial trouble, can you help?" She would have asked for help, not tried to steal it through lies about cancer. Jessica finally stood up, clutching the folder of financial documents against her chest like a shield. "You're right. You're absolutely right, and I know that. But Mom, if you turn your back on us now, the kids will suffer. Emma and Tyler will lose their home, their school, their friends. Is that really what you want? Don't you dare!" My voice dropped to a whisper that made Jessica step backward. "Don't you dare try to manipulate me using my grandchildren. That's your specialty, isn't it? Finding people's weak spots and pressing on them until they give you what you want. The kids are innocent in this. Yes, they are. Which is why what you did to them is almost as unforgivable as what you did to me." I stepped closer to her, and she actually backed away from me. "You put their security at risk with your financial recklessness. You taught them that it's okay to live beyond your means as long as someone else pays the bills. And now you're using them as emotional blackmail to try to get money from their grandmother." Jessica's face was red and blotchy now, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to fix this." "Here's a thought," I said conversationally. "Try telling the truth. Try asking for help instead of stealing it. Try taking responsibility for your choices instead of making them everyone else's problem." "I am taking responsibility." "No, you're not. You're standing in my living room making excuses and trying to guilt me into giving you money you tried to steal through fraud." I pointed toward the door. "Taking responsibility would be going home to your husband and having an honest conversation about bankruptcy, downsizing, and living within your means. Bankruptcy will ruin Brad's career. Brad's career is already ruined. Honey, that malpractice lawsuit isn't going away, and word gets around in the dental community. But you know what? Sometimes when you hit bottom, the only direction left is up." Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara even more. "So that's it? You're just going to abandon us?" "I'm going to do something I should have done years ago," I repeated my earlier words, watching recognition flash across her face. "I'm going to stop enabling you." "Enabling me? When you couldn't afford Emma's dance lessons, who paid for them? When your car broke down and you needed a new transmission, who covered that? When Tyler wanted to go to that expensive summer camp with his friends, who made that possible?" I crossed my arms and waited. Jessica's silence was answer enough. "For 5 years, ever since your father died and left me with a comfortable nest egg, you've been coming to me with financial emergencies. Small ones at first, a few hundred here, 1,000 there, then bigger ones. The down payment for Brad's practice expansion, the deposit on your current house when you couldn't qualify for the mortgage on your own. You never complained, because I thought I was helping my daughter build a good life for her family. What I was actually doing was enabling you to live a lifestyle you couldn't afford and teaching you that there would always be someone to bail you out of your bad decisions." Jessica stared at me like she'd never seen me before. "You sound like you hate me." "I don't hate you," I said sadly. "I'm disappointed in you. There's a difference, although right now it probably doesn't feel like much of one." She walked slowly toward the door, then turned back. "What if I told you I'd pay back every penny you've ever given us? What if I promised to get our finances in order and never ask you for money again? I'd say you're still trying to negotiate your way out of consequences instead of facing them." I held her gaze steadily. "Jessica, there is nothing you can say right now that will make me give you $400,000. Nothing you can promise that will make me trust you with my money again. You burned that bridge when you decided to lie about Brad having cancer. So what am I supposed to do? Whatever people who don't have rich mothers do when they're in financial trouble. File for bankruptcy. Sell the house. Take the kids out of private school. Get a job that pays more than your part-time real estate hobby. Face reality." She flinched at each suggestion like I was slapping her. "You're talking about destroying everything we've built." "You already destroyed it," I pointed out. "The house you can't afford, the lifestyle you can't maintain, the debts you can't pay, none of it was real, Jessica. It was all built on borrowed money and borrowed time. I'm just refusing to pretend otherwise anymore." Jessica walked through the door, then turned back one more time. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice bitter with defeat. "I hope your precious principles keep you warm at night when you don't have any family left." "At least I'll have my integrity," I replied. "That's more than you can say." I closed the door and leaned against it, listening to her car start and drive away. Then I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat down at the table with my laptop. If Jessica thought this was over, she was very much mistaken. I wasn't just cutting her off financially. I was going to make sure she learned exactly what happens when you try to con people who are smarter than you think they are. I opened a new browser window and started typing. Private investigators, tax attorneys, bankruptcy specialists. If Jessica wanted to play hardball, she was about to discover that her harmless old mother had been taking notes all these years. And this game was just getting started. By midnight, I had made 6 phone calls, sent a dozen emails, and put together a strategy that would make Jessica's current financial problems look like a minor inconvenience. Tom always said I was too forgiving, too willing to let people walk all over me. But Tom wasn't here anymore. And the woman Jessica had tried to con wasn't the same woman who used to let people take advantage of her kindness. That woman was gone, and what had taken her place was far more dangerous than my daughter could possibly imagine. The next morning, I was up before dawn, feeling more energetic than I had in months. There's something clarifying about discovering that your only child thinks you're a gullible old fool. It strips away all the nonsense and shows you exactly who you're dealing with. I made coffee, scrambled eggs, and ate breakfast while reviewing the notes I'd made the night before. By 8 o'clock, I was on the phone with my attorney, Harold Brennan, who'd handled Tom's estate and had been gently suggesting for years that I update my will. Margaret, Harold's voice was warm with genuine concern. I have to say, what you're describing sounds quite serious. Are you certain you want to take such drastic steps? Harold, my daughter tried to steal $400,000 from me by faking her husband's cancer diagnosis. I'm not just certain, I'm energized. There was a pause. Harold had known Jessica since she was a teenager, had watched her grow up, had probably thought of her as a nice young woman who'd married well and built a good life for herself. All right, he said finally. Let's talk about your options. We talked for over an hour. Harold explained the legal implications of what Jessica had attempted, the various ways I could protect my assets, and the steps I could take to ensure that my generosity would never be taken advantage of again. There is one thing you should know, Harold said, as our conversation was winding down. If you pursue criminal charges for attempted fraud, Jessica could face serious legal consequences. We're talking about a felony charge with potential prison time. Good, I said without hesitation. Maybe that will get her attention in a way that gentle parental guidance never did. After hanging up with Harold, I called my financial advisor, Patricia Welsh. Patricia had been managing my investments for 15 years, had helped me navigate Tom's death and the inheritance he'd left me, and had guided me through the lottery windfall with professional expertise and personal warmth. Margaret, I'm so sorry to hear about this situation with Jessica, Patricia said, after I'd explained what had happened. Financial fraud within families is unfortunately more common than people realize, but it never gets easier to deal with emotionally. I'm not interested in dealing with it emotionally, I said briskly. I'm interested in dealing with it strategically. Patricia laughed, a sound of surprised admiration. All right then, let's talk strategy. We spent an hour restructuring my accounts, setting up new security protocols, and creating legal barriers that would make it impossible for anyone to access my money without my explicit written consent. Patricia also recommended a forensic accountant who specialized in tracking financial fraud. If Jessica has been forging documents or misrepresenting her financial situation in other ways, we'll find it, Patricia assured me. And if she's been using your previous gifts to her as collateral for loans or other financial instruments, we'll discover that too. By noon, I had spoken with a private investigator, a forensic accountant, a tax attorney, and a specialist in family financial crimes. Each conversation had revealed new layers to Jessica's deception, and each revelation had made me angrier and more determined. The private investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen Mills, called me back within 2 hours of our initial conversation. Mrs. Collins, I've done some preliminary checking on your daughter and son-in-law, and I think you need to know that their financial situation is even worse than they've told you. Worse how? Brad's dental practice is facing not just one malpractice lawsuit, but 3. He's also being investigated by the State Dental Board for possible insurance fraud related to unnecessary procedures. And Jessica hasn't been working as a real estate agent for 6 months. She lost her license for misrepresenting property values on several sales. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. She what? It gets worse. They've been living on credit cards and loans against properties they don't actually own. The house you think they're living in? It's been in foreclosure proceedings for 4 months. They're essentially squatters in their own home. I sat down heavily, trying to process this information. How is that possible? I've talked to Jessica dozens of times over the past few months, and she's never mentioned any of this. Because they've been living a complete lie, Mrs. Collins. The country club membership, the private schools, the expensive cars, none of it is paid for. They've been robbing Peter to pay Paul for so long that they've lost track of which debts are real and which are just reshuffled credit. And they thought $400,000 would fix all of this? They probably thought it would buy them time to figure out their next move. But honestly, at this point, they're looking at bankruptcy, criminal fraud charges, and potentially prison time. Your lottery money wouldn't have saved them. It would just have made their eventual fall that much harder. After hanging up with Karen, I sat in Tom's chair and stared out the window at the maple tree in our backyard. The leaves were turning red and gold, and for a moment I could almost see Tom sitting beside me, shaking his head at the mess our daughter had made of her life. "What would you do?" I asked aloud, the way I sometimes did when I missed him most. The answer came immediately, in Tom's dry, practical voice that I could still hear clearly in my memory. "I'd make sure she learned the lesson she should have learned 20 years ago when she first started spending money she didn't have." I picked up the phone and called Jessica. She answered on the first ring, her voice eager and hopeful. "Mom, have you thought about what we discussed yesterday?" "I have," I said calmly. "In fact, I've been thinking about little else, which is why I've spent the morning with lawyers, accountants, and private investigators." The silence on the other end was so complete, I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Jessica's voice came back, small and scared. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know about the 3 malpractice lawsuits. I know about Brad's investigation by the dental board. I know about your real estate license being revoked. I know about the foreclosure proceedings on your house." I paused, letting each revelation sink in. "I know you've been lying to me about everything, not just Brad's health." "Mom, I'm not finished," I said firmly. "I also know that you're facing potential criminal charges for fraud, that you've been living on borrowed money for years, and that $400,000 wouldn't have solved your problems anyway." The sound Jessica made was half sob, half moan. "How did you find all this out?" "The same way you should have found out that Methodist Hospital has no record of Brad Henderson," I said dryly. "Research, investigation, due diligence, you know, the things people do when they're not trying to commit fraud. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to do what I should have done years ago when you first started coming to me for money," I said. "I'm going to let you face the consequences of your choices." "Mom, please, I've already filed a complaint with the police about your attempted fraud. I've also alerted the district attorney's office about your pattern of financial deception. And I've made sure that every penny of my lottery winnings is protected from any claims you might try to make against my estate." Jessica was crying now. Ugly sobs that might have moved me if I hadn't known that she was crying for herself, not for the hurt she'd caused me. "You're destroying my family," she managed to say between sobs. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "You destroyed your family. I'm just refusing to enable you to destroy mine." I hung up the phone and walked to the kitchen to make myself a sandwich. For the first time since Tom died, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. The phone rang again. Jessica, of course. I let it go to voicemail, then deleted her message without listening to it. She would call back. They always did. But I was done being the solution to other people's problems, especially when those problems were self-inflicted and the people asking for help had just tried to steal from me. I had $3 million, a clear conscience, and a future that suddenly looked much brighter than it had 24 hours ago. Jessica had bankruptcy, criminal charges, and the consequences of her own choices. And for the first time in my adult life, I was completely at peace with that arrangement. Chapters 6-10, The Final Reckoning. 2 weeks after Jessica's arrest, I was making my morning coffee when my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. sharp. Through the peephole, I could see a woman I didn't recognize, mid-50s, professionally dressed, with the kind of sharp eyes that suggested she wasn't here for a social call. "Mrs. Collins? I'm Detective Sarah Mitchell with the Minneapolis Police Department. I need to discuss some developments in your daughter's case." I let her in, noting how she studied my living room with the practiced gaze of someone who'd seen too much human nature in her line of work. She declined coffee, but accepted my offer to sit down. "Mrs. Collins, I have to ask, were you aware that Jessica had been using your name and personal information to secure loans over the past 2 years?" My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. "What kind of loans?" Detective Mitchell opened a folder thick with documents. "Payday loans, personal loans, even a second mortgage application on this house." She handed me a sheet of paper. "This application shows Jessica claiming to be your power of attorney, using your lottery winnings as collateral for a $300,000 loan." I stared at the paperwork, seeing my forged signature scrawled across documents I'd never seen before. "She's been doing this since before she even asked me for the cancer money." "We believe so. The forensic accountant found evidence going back at least 18 months. Jessica has been systematically stealing your identity to fund her lifestyle while her real financial situation deteriorated." The detective's words hit me like physical blows. This wasn't just about the lottery money. Jessica had been stealing from me for over a year. "How much money are we talking about?" "Approximately $180,000 in fraudulent loans, all secured using your name and credit." Detective Mitchell leaned forward, her expression sympathetic but professional. "Mrs. Collins, there's more. We have reason to believe Jessica may have been planning this cancer scam for months, possibly since the day you won the lottery." I set down my coffee cup with hands that barely trembled. 3 weeks ago, that revelation would have destroyed me. Now it just made me angry. "What kind of evidence?" "Text messages between Jessica and Brad dating back 3 months. They reference the Big Ask, emergency planning, and something called Operation Tearjerker." The detective's voice was carefully neutral. "They also discuss your gullible nature and how to play up the emotional angle." Operation Tearjerker. My daughter had given their fraud scheme a cute code name. "I assume you'll be adding identity theft and conspiracy charges to her case?" "Among others. But Mrs. Collins, I have to warn you. Jessica's lawyer is claiming that you knew about the loans, that you gave her permission to use your information for family financial planning." I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to make Detective Mitchell raise her eyebrows. "Detective, I was a librarian for 30 years. I keep receipts for my grocery purchases. Do you really think I'd authorize $180,000 in secret loans without keeping any documentation?" "That's what I told the district attorney." The detective smiled slightly. "Jessica's also claiming that her actions were motivated by genuine concern for your welfare, that she was trying to protect your lottery winnings from poor financial decisions. By stealing them herself. How thoughtful." I stood up and walked to my kitchen drawer, pulling out the manila folder where I kept all my important documents. "Detective, let me show you something." I handed her a copy of my financial plan, complete with my advisor's signature and detailed investment strategies. "This is what someone who doesn't know how to manage money looks like." Detective Mitchell reviewed the documents with obvious respect. "Mrs. Collins, you've allocated your lottery winnings across diversified investments, charitable trusts, and secure savings accounts. This is sophisticated financial planning. Turns out 30 years of managing a library budget teaches you a thing or two about money." I sat back down, feeling calmer than I had since this whole nightmare began. "Detective, what happens next?" "Jessica and Brad are both facing federal charges: wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit elder abuse. The district attorney is treating this as organized financial crime, not family drama." She closed her folder and stood up. "Mrs. Collins, I have to ask, are you prepared for what comes next? Your daughter is likely looking at significant prison time." I walked Detective Mitchell to the door, thinking about the little girl who used to help me bake cookies on Sunday afternoons, the teenager who'd cried in my arms after her first heartbreak, the young woman who'd called me in excitement when she got engaged. That person was gone, replaced by someone who could look me in the eye and lie about her husband dying while systematically stealing my identity for over a year. "Detective," I said quietly, 3 weeks ago, I would have given Jessica $500,000 without question because she asked me to. Today, I'm prepared to testify at her trial and watch her face the consequences of treating my love like a business opportunity. After Detective Mitchell left, I poured myself a second cup of coffee and called Patricia, my financial advisor. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm with concern. "Margaret, I heard about the identity theft charges. How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected," I said honestly. "Patricia, I need to ask you something. If Jessica had successfully gotten that $400,000 from me, would it have actually solved her problems?" There was a pause. "Margaret, based on what the police told me about their debt situation, $400,000 would have maybe bought them 6 months. They owe over $800,000, and Brad's practice is hemorrhaging money. They're facing bankruptcy regardless. So they would have come back for more money. Almost certainly. People with that level of financial dysfunction don't change their behavior just because they get a windfall. They usually see it as permission to spend even more recklessly." I hung up feeling oddly relieved. Every revelation about Jessica's deception made it easier to accept what had happened. This wasn't a moment of weakness or desperation. It was a pattern of calculated manipulation that would have continued indefinitely if I hadn't discovered the truth. My phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Collins, this is Amanda Richardson from Channel 7 News. We understand you're the victim of an elaborate family fraud scheme involving lottery winnings. Would you be interested in sharing your story?" "No comment," I said firmly. But something made me pause before hanging up. Although I will say this, sometimes the best thing that can happen to someone is learning exactly who they can't trust. I ended the call and walked to my front window, looking out at the quiet street where I'd lived for 30 years. My neighbors probably had no idea that the boring widow in the blue house had just dismantled her daughter's criminal empire with nothing more than good record-keeping and a private investigator. Tom would have been proud. He'd always said I was stronger than I knew. I was finally starting to believe him. The doorbell rang again. This time it was my neighbor Grace, holding a casserole dish and wearing the expression of someone who'd been listening to Police Scanner. "Martha," she said gently, "I brought you some dinner. Thought you might not feel like cooking tonight." I let her in, grateful for the kindness of someone who expected nothing from me except basic human decency. "Grace," I said as she settled the casserole on my counter, "do you think I'm too hard on Jessica?" She turned to study me with eyes that had seen 80 years of human nature. "Martha, honey, there's a difference between being hard on someone and refusing to be their doormat. Sounds to me like you finally learned that difference." That night, as I ate Grace's casserole and watched the evening news, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with my own decisions. Tomorrow would bring more legal proceedings, more revelations, more opportunities for Jessica to try manipulating me. But tonight, for the first time since Tom died, I felt like myself again. Not someone's easy mark or convenient ATM. Just Margaret Collins, a woman who'd learned the hard way that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just an invitation to be used. The courtroom was packed when Jessica's preliminary hearing began, and I was surprised to see Brad sitting in the defendant's chair beside her. Apparently, when faced with federal fraud charges, their unified front had crumbled faster than their marriage was about to. Jessica's lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, was arguing that his client was a victim of postpartum depression and financial desperation who'd made poor choices while under extreme duress. Brad's lawyer was arguing that his client had been manipulated by Jessica and was guilty of nothing more than loving his wife too much. I sat in the back row, watching my daughter perform for the judge. She'd dressed carefully, a conservative navy dress, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a style that made her look younger and more vulnerable. She even managed to produce tears on cue when her lawyer described the crushing pressure of their financial situation. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena Santos, wasn't buying it. "Your Honor, the defendants didn't just commit fraud, they created an elaborate criminal enterprise. Mrs. Henderson spent 18 months systematically stealing her mother's identity. Mr. Henderson participated in faking medical documents and hospital records. This wasn't desperation. This was premeditated theft. Prosecutor Santos presented evidence I hadn't known existed: fake hospital letterhead, forged doctor signatures, even a fake patient portal account they'd created to make their cancer story more convincing. The level of planning was staggering. The defendants created an entire fictional medical crisis," Santos continued. They researched liver cancer symptoms, found a real doctor in Houston who specializes in the condition, and even set up fake payment schedules to make their story more believable. This level of sophistication indicates months of careful planning. I felt sick listening to the details. While I'd been grieving Tom and trying to rebuild my life, Jessica had been studying my psychological weaknesses and planning the most effective way to exploit them. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, was clearly unimpressed with the defense arguments. "Mrs. Henderson, you are charged with wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor." Jessica's voice was steady, but I could see her hands shaking as she gripped the defendant's table. "Mr. Henderson, you are charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor." The judge set bail at $50,000 each and scheduled the trial for 6 weeks later. As the defendants were led away, Jessica caught sight of me in the back row. Her expression shifted from performed vulnerability to genuine hatred so quickly that I actually flinched. In that moment, I saw my daughter clearly for perhaps the first time in her adult life. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was furious at being caught. Outside the courthouse, I was approached by Prosecutor Santos. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd built her career on cases like this. "Mrs. Collins, I wanted to thank you for your cooperation with the investigation. Your documentation and the private investigator's work made this case much stronger than it would have been otherwise. I just want to understand," I said. "How did they think they'd get away with this?" Santos gestured toward a bench where we could sit and talk privately. "Mrs. Collins, in my experience, people who commit financial fraud against family members often convince themselves they're not really stealing. They tell themselves it's borrowing, or that they deserve the money, or that their victims wouldn't miss it. But Jessica knew I'd find out eventually when Brad didn't die. They probably planned to keep extending the story. Complications with surgery, additional treatments, maybe even fake relapses. People who start with one lie often find themselves committed to increasingly elaborate deceptions." Santos paused. "Mrs. Collins, there's something else you should know. We've been contacted by 3 other families with similar stories." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Jessica and Brad appear to have attempted this scheme before, with less success. A cousin in Portland, an elderly neighbor in their previous city, even Brad's own grandmother. They'd perfected their approach by the time they targeted you." I stared at the prosecutor, trying to process this information. "They're serial con artists?" "We believe so. The pattern suggests they've been doing this for years, targeting family members and acquaintances with significant assets. You were just their biggest score." That evening, I sat in Tom's chair with a glass of wine and tried to understand how I'd raised a daughter capable of systematically defrauding elderly relatives. Where had I gone wrong? What signs had I missed? My phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Mom?" Jessica's voice was small, scared. "I'm out on bail. Can we talk?" "I think we've said everything we need to say, Jessica. Please, just 5 minutes. I can explain everything." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. She was waiting when I arrived, looking smaller somehow, like the fight had gone out of her. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she was scared. "Mom, I know how this looks, but you have to understand. We were desperate. Really, truly desperate. Desperate enough to con other families too?" I watched her face go pale. "That's right, Jessica. The prosecutor told me about Portland, about Brad's grandmother, about your neighbor. This isn't your first time, is it?" Jessica's composure cracked completely. "How did they find out about that?" "Because investigators investigate." "Sweetheart, just like you should have investigated whether Methodist Hospital had any record of your husband before using them in your lies. Mom, those other times, they weren't like this. We never asked for much, and we always intended to pay people back." "How much did you steal from Brad's grandmother?" Jessica looked down at her hands. $35,000. But she was already sick, and she died 6 months later, so it didn't matter. The casual callousness took my breath away. "It didn't matter because she died? That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is exactly what you meant." I stood up, suddenly eager to get away from this stranger wearing my daughter's face. "Jessica, I want you to listen very carefully. I am not your victim anymore. I am not your backup plan or your emergency fund or your safety net. I am the woman who is going to testify at your trial and watch you face the consequences of treating people's love like a business opportunity. Mom, please, I'm not your mother anymore. The words surprised me as much as they surprised her. Mothers protect their children. Mothers sacrifice for their families. Mothers don't steal from elderly relatives and justify it by saying the victims died anyway. I walked away, leaving Jessica sitting alone in the coffee shop. In my rearview mirror, I could see her crying, but for the first time since this began, her tears meant nothing to me. When I got home, there was a message from Detective Mitchell. Mrs. Collins, Jessica violated her bail conditions by contacting you directly. If you're willing to file a report, we can have her arrested tonight. I called the detective back immediately. Detective Mitchell, this is Margaret Collins. I'd like to file that report. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. But sometimes you discover you're better off on the other side anyway. Jessica was back in jail by morning, and I was surprised by how little satisfaction I felt watching the news report about her bail revocation. There's a difference between justice and revenge, and I was finally understanding that difference. My phone had been ringing all day, reporters wanting interviews, distant relatives expressing shock, neighbors offering support. I'd stopped answering, content to let the calls go to voicemail while I sat in my kitchen and planned my next move. Because despite what Jessica thought, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. At 2 p.m., my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see a man in his 60s wearing an expensive suit and the kind of confident expression that suggested he was used to getting his way. Behind him stood a woman about Jessica's age, well-dressed and carrying a briefcase. Mrs. Collins, I'm Robert Thompson, Jessica's new attorney. This is my associate, Linda Martinez. We need to discuss a settlement proposal. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. Settlement? Jessica is facing federal charges. I don't think I have anything to settle. Mrs. Collins, we have reason to believe that pursuing this case could expose you to significant legal liability. Thompson's voice was smooth, practiced. Perhaps we could come in and discuss this privately? Despite every instinct telling me not to, curiosity won. I led them to my living room, noting how Thompson's eyes immediately cataloged the value of everything he saw. Mrs. Collins, Linda Martinez began, opening her briefcase. Our investigation has revealed some concerning information about how you obtained your lottery winnings. I kept my expression neutral. I bought a lottery ticket and won. It's not particularly complicated. That's what we thought initially, Thompson interjected. But when we examined the convenience store's security footage from the day you purchased the winning ticket, we discovered something interesting. He handed me a folder containing printed screenshots from what appeared to be security camera footage. The images were grainy, but they clearly showed me at the lottery counter. Mrs. Collins, according to the store clerk who sold you that ticket, you purchased it using a credit card that belonged to your late husband, a credit card that had been canceled 3 months prior to his death. My blood went cold. That's impossible. Is it? Linda Martinez leaned forward. Mrs. Collins, we have bank records showing that you continued using your husband's credit cards for 6 months after his death. The lottery ticket purchase was just one of many fraudulent transactions. Thompson smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Mrs. Collins, technically speaking, you purchased your winning lottery ticket with fraudulent funds. Under Minnesota state law, any winnings obtained through illegal means are subject to seizure. I stared at the documents, my mind racing. Tom had died suddenly, and there had been so much paperwork, so many accounts to close. Had I accidentally used one of his cards? It was possible, but even if that were true, I said carefully, it would be a civil matter, not criminal fraud. Perhaps, Thompson agreed, but it would certainly complicate your position as a victim in Jessica's case. A jury might be less sympathetic to someone who committed similar financial irregularities. The threat was clear, and it was clever. Even if their claims didn't hold up in court, the suggestion that I'd obtained my lottery winnings through fraud would muddy the waters considerably. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Linda Martinez opened another folder. Jessica pleads guilty to a misdemeanor charge of financial misconduct. She receives probation and community service. The identity theft and conspiracy charges are dropped. In exchange, Your credit card irregularities remain private. And Brad? Mr. Henderson's charges are dropped entirely in exchange for his testimony that Jessica acted alone and without his knowledge. I looked at the settlement papers, then at the two lawyers watching me with calculating expressions. They thought they had me cornered, thought they'd found the perfect leverage to turn victim into perpetrator. This is quite a generous offer, I said mildly. I assume I need to decide quickly? The district attorney needs an answer by tomorrow morning, Thompson confirmed. Mrs. Collins, I should mention that if this goes to trial, these credit card irregularities will become public record. Your reputation in the community, your relationships with friends and neighbors, would all be affected, I finished. I understand perfectly. I walked them to the door with a promise to consider their offer carefully. The moment they were gone, I called Patricia, my financial advisor. Patricia, I need you to pull every record of my financial activity for the 6 months after Tom died. Every transaction, every account, every payment. Margaret, what's wrong? Jessica's lawyers think they've found evidence that I committed credit card fraud. They're trying to use it as leverage. There was a pause. Margaret, you were scrupulous about closing Tom's accounts. I helped you with most of the paperwork myself. What exactly are they claiming? I explained Thompson's allegations while Patricia pulled up my records on her computer. I could hear her typing, clicking through files, cross-referencing dates. Margaret, I'm looking at the convenience store transaction from the day you won the lottery. You paid cash, $60 in cash for lottery tickets and a coffee. There's no credit card transaction of any kind. Relief flooded through me. Are you certain? Absolutely. I'm looking at your bank statements right now. On the day you won the lottery, you made one withdrawal from your checking account, $100 cash from the ATM at First National Bank. That's how you paid for everything. I felt myself smiling for the first time in days. Patricia, could you email me copies of those records? Already sending them. After hanging up with Patricia, I called Detective Mitchell. Detective, I need to report an attempted extortion. Mrs. Collins, what happened? I explained Thompson's visit, his allegations, and the settlement offer they'd presented. Detective Mitchell listened with growing interest. Mrs. Collins, if they fabricated evidence to coerce you into accepting a plea deal, that's a serious federal crime. Do you still have the documents they showed you? Every single page. Don't touch them. We'll need to examine them for evidence of digital manipulation. Mrs. Collins, if Jessica's legal team is manufacturing evidence, they're in far more trouble than your daughter ever was. That evening, as I sat in my kitchen with Patricia's email confirming my innocence and Detective Mitchell's assurance that the FBI would investigate Thompson's tactics, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Genuine amusement. Jessica and her lawyers had tried to con the woman who'd exposed their original con. They'd attempted to blackmail someone who'd already proven she was smarter than they gave her credit for. They'd underestimated me one more time, and this time it was going to cost them everything. Tom always said I was too nice for my own good, but Tom had never seen me when someone threatened my integrity. Tomorrow, I was going to show Jessica's legal team what happened when you tried to intimidate a librarian who knew how to research, document, and think 3 moves ahead. They thought they were playing chess with someone who only knew checkers. They were about to discover they'd challenged a grand master. The next morning, I was in Detective Mitchell's office at 8 a.m. sharp with every document Thompson and Martinez had shown me, along with Patricia's financial records proving their allegations were fabricated. What I wasn't prepared for was what Detective Mitchell discovered when she examined their evidence more closely. Mrs. Collins, she said, looking up from her computer screen, these security photos have been digitally altered. Whoever created them took legitimate footage from the convenience store and superimposed images of credit cards over cash transactions. They doctored the photos? Very sophisticated work. 2. This isn't something you do on your home computer. Detective Mitchell leaned back in her chair, studying me with new interest. Mrs. Collins, who exactly did you think you were dealing with? Jessica's new lawyers. Why? Because Robert Thompson isn't a lawyer. He's a con artist with a 20-year history of elder abuse cases. Linda Martinez is his partner, and she's wanted in 3 states for legal document forgery. The room seemed to tilt sideways. What are you saying? I'm saying your daughter didn't hire new legal representation. She hired professional criminals who specialize in exactly the kind of scheme they tried to run on you yesterday. Detective Mitchell turned her computer screen toward me, showing criminal records for both Thompson and Martinez. Fraud, extortion, identity theft, elder abuse. Their rap sheets read like a tutorial in financial crime. How did Jessica even find these people? That's what we're trying to figure out. But Mrs. Collins, there's something else. Thompson and Martinez have been under federal surveillance for 6 months. The FBI has been tracking their operation, waiting for the right moment to take them down. And I walked right into the middle of their investigation. Actually, you may have just handed the FBI the evidence they needed to arrest them. Detective Mitchell smiled. Mrs. Collins, when Thompson showed you those fake documents yesterday, he committed extortion in front of a witness. When Martinez presented the fraudulent settlement papers, she committed conspiracy to obstruct justice. Thanks to your cooperation, we have them both on video attempting to blackmail a federal witness. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this information. Detective, how did Jessica connect with these people? She's been in jail. Phone calls, email through her public defender's office, maybe even contact from before her arrest. Detective Mitchell pulled out another file. Mrs. Collins, we need to consider the possibility that Jessica's lottery scam wasn't her idea. That she was working for Thompson and Martinez from the beginning. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You think this was all planned? That they've been targeting me specifically? I think your lottery win made you a very attractive target for people who specialize in defrauding vulnerable adults. And I think Jessica was recruited to get close to you because she already had access. Detective Mitchell showed me surveillance photos of Jessica meeting with Thompson and Martinez at various locations around Minneapolis. Coffee shops, restaurants, parking lots. The meetings dated back 8 months, long before Jessica had asked me for the cancer money. 8 months, I whispered. She's been planning this for 8 months. The timeline suggests they identified you as a target shortly after your lottery win became public. They would have researched your background, your family relationships, your psychological profile. Jessica was their inside source. I stared at the photographs, seeing my daughter's face clearly in each one. In some photos, she was taking notes. In others, she was reviewing documents. In one particularly damning image, she was accepting an envelope from Thompson that was clearly stuffed with cash. How much were they paying her? We're still tracking the financial records, but preliminary evidence suggests Jessica received at least $15,000 in payments from Thompson's organization. She wasn't just stealing from you. She was being paid to do it. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I almost felt impressed by its scope. My daughter hadn't just decided to steal from me out of desperation. She'd been recruited by professional criminals, trained in manipulation techniques, and compensated for her treachery. Detective, I said slowly, what happens now? Now we arrest Thompson and Martinez for attempted extortion, document forgery, and conspiracy. Jessica's charges get upgraded to include organized criminal activity, and you get to decide whether you want to press additional charges for the psychological trauma of discovering your daughter was part of a criminal conspiracy targeting elderly lottery winners. I thought about Jessica sitting in her jail cell, probably believing she was just a victim of bad circumstances and poor choices. The reality was so much worse. She'd volunteered to be part of an organization that systematically targeted people like me. There's one more thing, Detective Mitchell said gently. The FBI wants to know if you'd be willing to help with a controlled operation to gather more evidence against Thompson's network. What kind of operation? They want you to call Thompson and agree to the settlement meeting. The FBI would wire you for sound and video, document the entire extortion attempt. Your testimony could help them shut down an organization that's been preying on elderly people across multiple states. I looked at Jessica's photos one more time, seeing the calculation in her eyes, the practiced deception in her smile. For 35 years, I'd thought I was looking at my daughter. Now I realized I'd been looking at a stranger who happened to share my DNA. Detective Mitchell, I said firmly, when do we start? 2 hours later, I was sitting in an FBI surveillance van wearing a wire and preparing to take down the people who thought they could intimidate a 67-year-old librarian into accepting their extortion demands. They'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that because I was elderly and had been victimized by my own daughter, I was weak. They were about to discover that there's a difference between being trusting and being helpless, and they were about to learn it the hard way. The FBI surveillance van was cramped but state-of-the-art, filled with recording equipment and federal agents who treated me with the kind of professional respect I'd never expected to receive at 67. Agent Rebecca Foster, the operations leader, was briefing me on what to expect when I met Thompson and Martinez at the downtown hotel they'd specified. "Mrs. Collins, you'll be wearing both audio and video recording devices. We'll have agents positioned throughout the hotel and backup units standing by outside. If at any point you feel unsafe, just say the phrase, 'I need to think about this more carefully,' and we'll move in immediately." I adjusted the tiny camera hidden in my brooch and tested the microphone concealed in my collar. "Agent Foster, what exactly do you expect them to do? Based on their previous operations, they'll likely present you with more fabricated evidence, demand immediate payment or settlement, and possibly threaten to destroy your reputation if you don't comply." Agent Foster checked her watch. "Mrs. Collins, these people are dangerous. They've driven at least 3 elderly victims to nervous breakdowns, and one man in Portland actually had a heart attack during their intimidation session. Then let's make sure they don't hurt anyone else." The hotel meeting room was elegantly appointed, but felt like a trap the moment I walked in. Thompson and Martinez were waiting with briefcases, files, and the kind of predatory confidence that comes from years of successfully intimidating vulnerable people. "Mrs. Collins," Thompson stood as I entered, "thank you for coming. I trust you've had time to consider our proposal?" I sat down across from them, folding my hands calmly. "I've considered it quite carefully, but I have some questions about the evidence you showed me yesterday." Martinez opened her briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Of course. We've actually uncovered additional concerning information about your financial activities." She handed me a folder containing what appeared to be bank statements showing irregular transactions, forged signatures, and suspicious account activities. The documents were impressive forgeries, but I'd spent enough time with Patricia to recognize the inconsistencies. "Mrs. Collins," Thompson leaned forward, "these records show a pattern of financial fraud extending back several years before your lottery win. Identity theft, unauthorized use of deceased persons' accounts, even possible tax evasion. That's quite serious," I said mildly, remembering Agent Foster's coaching. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "We're suggesting that someone with your history of financial irregularities might want to avoid the public scrutiny of a criminal trial," Martinez replied smoothly. "Our settlement offer protects everyone's interests." Thompson pulled out a contract and slid it across the table. "Mrs. Collins, this agreement ensures that Jessica serves minimal jail time. Your financial irregularities remain private, and everyone moves forward with their lives intact." I picked up the contract, noting the paragraph that would require me to pay Thompson's legal fees, approximately $200,000, in exchange for their discretion about my alleged crimes. "This is extortion," I said quietly. "This is negotiation," Thompson corrected. "Mrs. Collins, you're 67 years old. How many years do you realistically have left to enjoy your lottery winnings? Is protecting your reputation really worth spending your remaining time fighting criminal charges?" Martinez nodded sympathetically. "Mrs. Collins, we understand this is difficult, but sometimes accepting reality is the most practical choice." "Reality," I repeated. "That's interesting, because the reality is that you've just attempted to extort money from a federal witness while being recorded by the FBI." The color drained from both their faces. Thompson started to stand, but froze when Agent Foster and 3 other federal agents entered the room with weapons drawn. "Robert Thompson and Linda Martinez, you're under arrest for extortion, conspiracy, document forgery, and conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation," Agent Foster announced. "You have the right to remain silent." As the agents cuffed Thompson and Martinez, I sat calmly in my chair, watching justice unfold in real time. Thompson was screaming about his rights. Martinez was demanding to call her lawyer, but their voices seemed to come from very far away. "Mrs. Collins," Agent Foster said as the other agents led the criminals away, "are you all right?" "I'm perfect," I said honestly. "Agent Foster, what happens to Jessica now?" With her connection to Thompson's organization, she's looking at federal racketeering charges, in addition to the fraud and identity theft. We're talking about 15 to 20 years in federal prison. 20 years. Jessica would be in her 60s when she got out, assuming she got out at all. For a moment, I felt something that might have been sadness for the little girl she used to be. Then I remembered the photographs of her accepting cash payments for helping target elderly lottery winners, and the sadness passed. 3 weeks later, I sat in federal district court watching Jessica plead guilty to conspiracy to commit racketeering, wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. She'd aged years in the months since her arrest, and when she looked at me across the courtroom, I saw something I'd never seen before in my daughter's eyes: fear. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s, was clearly unimpressed with Jessica's tearful plea for leniency. "Mrs. Henderson, you participated in a criminal organization that specifically targeted elderly victims. You used your relationship with your mother to facilitate crimes against other families. This court sees no evidence of remorse, only regret at being caught. Sentencing is set for 6 weeks from today. Until then, the defendant will remain in federal custody without bail." As Jessica was led away in shackles, she turned to look at me one final time. I met her gaze steadily, feeling nothing but a profound sense of closure. Outside the courthouse, Agent Foster approached me with news about Thompson's organization. "Mrs. Collins, your cooperation helped us identify 17 other victims across 6 states. Thompson and Martinez are facing federal charges that will likely result in life sentences. What about the other families? The people they'd already hurt? We're working to recover stolen funds and assets. Your case provided the breakthrough we needed to track their entire operation." 6 weeks later, Jessica was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Brad received 12 years for his role in the conspiracy. Thompson and Martinez each received life sentences without possibility of parole. I attended every sentencing hearing, not out of vindictiveness, but because I needed to see justice completed. I needed to know that the people who preyed on elderly victims would never have another chance to destroy someone's family. That evening, I sat in Tom's chair with a glass of wine and looked at the photo albums I'd pulled out after learning the truth about Jessica's crimes. There were so many pictures of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations, all the memories I'd treasured for 35 years. But looking at them now, I could see signs I'd missed. The calculation in Jessica's teenage eyes when she wanted something expensive. The practiced innocence when she'd been caught in small lies. The way she'd always been more interested in what I could give her than who I was as a person. The warning signs had been there all along. I'd just been too loving to see them clearly. My phone rang. Patricia, my financial advisor, calling with the news I'd been waiting for. "Margaret, the FBI has recovered most of the money Thompson's organization stole from other families. There's going to be a surplus after all the victims are compensated. What happens to it? The court is asking if you'd like to establish a foundation to help elderly victims of family fraud. Given your role in exposing the conspiracy, they think you'd be the ideal person to oversee it." I looked around my living room, at the house where Tom and I had built our life together, where I'd raised a daughter who grew up to betray everything we'd taught her. This house held so many memories, but it was time to create new ones. "Patricia," I said, "let's do it." 6 months later, I stood in the offices of the Collins Foundation for Elder Justice, watching our first team of investigators and victim advocates settle into their new workspace. We'd helped recover over $2 million for families victimized by schemes like Thompson's, and we were just getting started. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, knocked on my office door. "Mrs. Collins, there's a reporter here from 60 Minutes. They want to do a story about the foundation." "Tell them I'll give them an interview," I said, "but only if they agree to focus on the victims we've helped. Not just my story." As Sarah left to speak with the reporter, I looked out my office window at the bustling street below. Somewhere out there were other elderly people being targeted by their own families, other trusting parents being manipulated by children who saw inheritance as income. But now there was also somewhere for those people to turn. Thanks to Jessica's betrayal, I discovered a strength I'd never known I had, and a purpose I'd never expected to find. Tom always said everything happens for a reason. I'd never believed that before. Some things just seemed too cruel to have purpose. But sitting in my foundation office, surrounded by evidence of lives rebuilt and families saved, I finally understood what he meant. Jessica had tried to steal my future. Instead, she'd given me the most meaningful work of my life. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's making sure no one else has to go through what you survived. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you discover that being betrayed by someone you love isn't the end of your story. It's just the beginning of a better chapter.